The following program is classified M, recommended for viewing by mature audiences 15 years and over. It contains violence, coarse language, drug use and/or drug references, and mature themes.
Well, can't sell them, can't give them away. What do you expect me to do with them?
The Newlands baby farm. Doesn't that sound lovely? Little children frolicking amongst the grass and fields of an open paddock, daffodils growing, the sun shining. Doesn't that sound absolutely lovely? Unfortunately, the truth is very, very different. 1920s New Zealand was a very different place to what it is now. Should you be foolish enough to have a child out of wedlock, this literally was a sin against God, and a great disgrace to the whole family. If you were lucky, your parents would take you in and look after you and the baby, but many a time a young lady was simply cast off into the street for bringing shame onto the family. The social welfare system, such as it was not particularly kind to these people either. As with everything in human nature, people will take advantage of people when they're at their most vulnerable. Women with a baby they hadn't expected, couldn't afford to keep, had a problem the Newlands baby farm could help them with, but not in the way they probably wanted. Daniel Richard Cooper was born in Herbert, South Otago, on the 18th of October 1881. He was schooled and taught how to build. He helped build many houses in his local neighbourhood. He started travelling around New Zealand looking for work. In Oamaru in 1902 he was charged and convicted of burglary. Obviously he did not learn his lesson, because in 1905 he was convicted again of theft. This time he was in Palmerston North. He returned to the South Island and worked as a builder, and in 1907 he married Marion Burns. She was one of his neighbours. They had 2 children together and ran a small country store. The couple shifted to New Plymouth. Daniel joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and also he was selling books to make a living. In 1916, after almost 10 years in New Plymouth, they moved down to Gore, Southland. To make ends meet, Daniel sold medical books. In one particular one was called The Practical Guide to Good Health. He became even more interested in medical issues, probably more interested in making money out of medical issues than anything. His wife was now pregnant with their 3rd child, when, on the 18th of July 1917, Marion Cooper died. She was 8 months pregnant with their 3rd child. Daniel had been treating her for goiter. The medicine used for goiter treatment was quite harsh in those days, and if you took too much of it, it could kill you. Rumours spread that the marriage was an unhappy one, and perhaps it was murder, getting rid of an unwanted wife and an unwanted child all in one go. Fuel was added to the fire when only 6 months later Daniel Cooper remarried. He had been working in a neighbour's property 6 months beforehand when he met Miss Martha Stewart, 24 years old, 12 years younger than himself. It was on the 2nd of January 1918 that he got remarried. This was just 6 months after his first wife had died. He now moved to Dunedin. The Coopers sold hair restoring products, face creams, sold more books, and did the odd abortion on the side. By the end of 1918, it was time to move out of Dunedin and to move on to bigger and better things. The Coopers moved to Wellington. He stayed with his brother, did some building work, built a house for himself, and in 1920 they all moved from Island Bay to Adelaide Road in Newtown. In late October 1919, Daniel started a sexual relationship with his housekeeper. He just couldn't help himself, could he? And, unsurprisingly, by the middle of that year, Beatrice, the housekeeper, was pregnant. She was taken to Littleton Christchurch to have the baby. They left the baby there in care, and care was expensive. On their return to Wellington, they got a telegram saying that the baby was unwell and could they come and return to Christchurch. They picked up the baby from Christchurch, paid the carer off, and they returned to Wellington. On their return, Daniel arranged for the baby to be adopted out. He said, "It's gone to a good home. Everything's fine." Of course, the baby was never seen again. In March 1921, the Coopers moved to a farm in Newlands, just north of Wellington. They ran what was called a rest care home. Not so much for old people, but for people who needed somewhere to stay, needed rest and recuperation maybe, and of course if they were pregnant they could stay there till the baby was delivered. No one would know that way. Daniel also opened a medical practice in Lambton Quay. Despite the fact he wasn't trained as a doctor, this didn't go without notice. The local police were a bit suspicious about what he was up to.
By the end of 1922, Mr. Cooper's luck was starting to run out. His business at Lambton Quay was going very well, but it was under surveillance. The police wondered what he was up to. And they had every right to wonder, because as well as selling medical supplies in his books and treating people with other things, including an asthma inhaler which he had patented and made, he was also doing abortions on the side. And in those days it wasn't a very nice experience. It was either done with some piece of apparatus that looked like it came out of your uncle's shed, or more commonly with a concoction of poisons, which made the patient so violently sick that the baby died and the patient survived. Well, if you were lucky, the patient survived. But in 1922, a baby's body was found here at Lyall Bay Beach, and the police became suspicious when they received a note saying, "Mr. Cooper's up to his old tricks again." Ironically, this baby at Lyall Bay had absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Cooper.
Whoever wrote the note may have been the murderer of the baby, or perhaps they were just trying to blame Mr. Cooper. Either way, Mr. Cooper had a reputation for making babies disappear. On December 30th, 1922, the police arrested Daniel and Martha for detaining a child illegally. They started by searching the Lambton Quay offices. They soon found documents, letters and ledgers describing what had been going on. It is estimated he had done at least 10 abortions. On the 3rd of January 1923, the police started searching the 19-acre Newlands property. Approximately 30 yards from the back door of the house, in a loose patch of dirt underneath some trees, they found the small body of an infant girl, buried. Shortly after, they found another 2 small bodies, buried not that far away from the house. It was impossible to tell whether they were boys or girls. The trial focused on Mary McLeod, who gave birth to a daughter at the farm on the 12th of October 1922. She was paying approximately 15 shillings a week in rent to stay there, and an extra £50, which was an awful lot of money, for other expenses. She last saw her child on the 20th of October. Mr. Cooper had told her that the baby had been adopted to Palmerston North and was doing well. The coroner, Mr. Hector, identified that the date of birth of the child and the age of the body of the first infant girl found under the tree matched. There were several other witnesses for other children that went missing in Mr. Cooper's care, but really the case of Mary McLeod was enough to convict. Mr. Cooper would have known that quite early in the piece.
The thing we mustn't forget was that the murder trial was held right here in central Wellington. This was huge news. It was unbelievably a big story. And remember, in those days, you could only get your news stories from the newspaper or from your valve radio. Click. So that news was quite limited. And of course there was no such thing as live streaming, so if you wanted to see what was going on, you had to come to the High Court here in Wellington. And you could see a mass murderer who may have killed 4, 5, 6 babies, 10 abortions, and rumour is he may have killed his ex-wife too. And you could come and see him here, but everyone wanted to come and see him here, so there were queues literally around the corner. At lunchtime, the seating was divided into men's and women's, obviously, and the women wouldn't leave at lunchtime because they'd lose their seat and they wouldn't see what's going on in the afternoon. This was a huge story, not just in Wellington, but all over the whole country.
If you like this video, please tick like, subscribe and share it with a friend. More videos at by George NZ.
The jury took only an hour to find Mr. Cooper guilty on the first charge. The others were not proceeded with, but it hardly mattered. Mr. Cooper was clearly guilty of the first charge, and several others would have been easy enough to prove. Justice Frederick Chapman put on his black cap and sentenced Daniel Cooper to death. The order was that he should be taken to the Terrace prison and hung. On the 16th of June 1923, Daniel Richard Cooper woke up in his cell on the Terrace prison. He had a light breakfast of quarter of a bowl of porridge and a piece of toast. Fun enough, people who are going to get hung tend not to eat that well or sleep that well the night before. He was then joined by 2 officers of the Salvation Army. They read chapters from the Bible and he did a confession. He wrote a letter saying he was not guilty of all that he had been charged with. He was to be executed at 8 o'clock. At 7:30 he sat down at a desk and wrote a confession to say that yes, he had done some of the crimes that he was convicted of, but not as many as people had made out. One could speculate there may have been more that he could have been charged with and wasn't. He also said his wife was completely innocent of any wrongdoing. One could speculate about that too. At 8 a.m. he was taken to the scaffold. He closed his eyes and he was hung. The doctor on site confirmed that he was dead and had died of a broken neck. With hanging, you want to die of a broken neck, otherwise you strangle yourself to death. The broken neck is instant. His body was taken to Karori Cemetery and he was buried in this unmarked grave. His wife, Martha, returned to Dunedin and lived there for many years. She eventually died in Christchurch in 1975. The bodies of the babies were kept for many years. Eventually, they were collected with some other unknown bodies and buried here at Karori Cemetery in the children's section. The last part of our story doesn't occur till April 1971, when the house that the Coopers lived in was finally demolished. This story also made headline news around the country.